Hey folks, this is Matt Miller from Ditch That Textbook, and I wanted to welcome you to the Ditch That Textbook Digital Summit, where we're going to be talking to some impressive educators from all over the United States that are talking about technology and pedagogy and just all sorts of different topics that I know that you're going to be really interested in. And I know that the topic we're going to be sort of speaking about today, this is one that hits home with so many teachers and really just people in all walks of life. And it has to do with happiness. And it seems like there's so many things out there in the world right now that are robbing us of our happiness. And it affects our lives in all different realms, you know, in the classroom, at home, in our relationships and all of that. And I am always fascinated to hear our guest when she talks about this, because she knows the science behind it and she has some really actionable strategies to share with us. So I'm going to turn this over to Kim Strobel. And so Kim, can you give us just a little introduction to yourself and what you do?
Yes. Hello, everyone. It's nice to meet all of you virtually. I'm an educator. I've been an educator for several years, and now I'm a consultant, so I host my own workshops. But the title that seems to be most interesting to people is that I'm also a happiness coach. And as I've been giving my Strobel Ed trainings across the country, I sprinkle my trainings with a lot of these happiness tips. And what's really interesting, Matt, is usually it takes about the first morning break and teachers start to form a line at my table and they say, hey, I'm real interested in this topic you're teaching today, but I am most interested in this happiness retreat or this happiness workshop because I'm super stressed and overwhelmed and unfulfilled at times, and I don't know how to get my well-being back in check. And so I kind of, come at it from two different angles, the educator perspective, but then also the importance of well-being and how do we take care of ourselves and value ourselves enough to take care of ourselves. Yeah. And so, yes, there's a lot of background to all of this, but I feel like teachers, they need to have some strategies to take control of their lives again, because this profession has been extremely difficult to survive in. And so my heart really goes out to them as well.
Yeah. And it's been well documented, you know, the burnout among teachers and the unhappiness that comes with the job and all of the stress and the things that are put onto our plate. And sometimes it kind of drowns out all of the amazing things that we get to do in the classroom. And so we've seen that kind of all over the place. So to kind of go deeper into that, how can we, I was hoping maybe we could kind of put our finger on the problem here of, you know, how big a deal is this, do you think? The fact that we're just kind of like losing our happiness within education, but in general, I mean, how widespread is it? And how can we kind of see that this is really a big issue?
You know, I read a lot of what Dan Pink has to say, and one of the things that he talks about is that we've been in the knowledge age, which has been full of information. And so the people who have so-called made the most money, some people call that thriving, but the happiness research would actually tell you that more money does not make you happier. But the people who have thrived in the knowledge age the ones who have made the most money are kind of our strong left brainers. They follow mathematical algorithms very easily, and they read and understand and interpret information and can spit it back out. And he talks about how we're actually moving into what he calls the conceptual age, which means that well-being is at the forefront now. And, you know, back in the day, happiness and meditation and well-being and taking care of ourselves, that was all kind of seen as woo-woo-y. I mean, I remember even reading where you could work at one of the Chrysler plants and it was actually an offense if you got caught laughing on the job.
Wow, I can't believe that.
Isn't that incredible? And so the knowledge age, they say it's made us wealthy. We are all about things. I was joking with a friend recently We live in the age of abundance. I mean, our grandparents had 3 t-shirts to pick from, and you and I have 25 to pick from when we go pick out a t-shirt to wear for the day. And so the knowledge age has made us rich, but what we are finding out is that it has not made us happy. And so people are really willing. I feel like everyone is overstimulated, we're overwhelmed, we're overworked, we're exhausted, and we're kind of saying, like, there's got to be more to life than just surviving. And so how do I thrive, and how do I kind of take control of my own well-being, because my happiness matters? And I mean, you know, life is such a gift. And so how do we really like wake up on most days and start to readjust the lens through which we're kind of viewing our world, so to speak?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That, I mean, you could just preach that all day. I'm all about that. That's, I mean, it's so true. And it's so easy for us also to just kind of like muddle our way through our lives, just kind of like one foot in front of the other with our heads down, and not really, you know, thinking about where we're going with it and what we're accomplishing with it and everything. And I'd imagine that that probably all ties into happiness too, is to have, you know, have a purpose, right?
Yeah, to have a purpose and a mission and a calling is super important. And then just this idea of being present. And you know me, Matt, I am super high strung. I'm action oriented. I'm a get her done type of gal. And I even have to catch myself like check marking, got that done. Okay, move on to this. Now, how quickly can we do this? All right. And, you know, I've tried to now create some space that says, wait a minute, let's not miss the magic,
right,
the magic of this moment. And sometimes I think that we believe that when we work, the harder we work, the more productive we are. But the research actually says the opposite. And interestingly enough, you know, we've all kind of been led to believe that, you know, the harder you work, the more you climb the ladder, the more money you make, then eventually when you can get all of those things figured out, then happiness lies on the other side of that. I always say, unless you're a teacher, right? Because we,
yes, that's true.
our limits for money making seem to be kind of decreasing, so to speak. But I find that all of us are chasing that kind of, or following that formula. And in the last 10 years, Harvard has done a ton of research on positive psychology. And what we've actually uncovered is that the formula is completely backwards. And so what actually needs to happen is the happier you become first. So if you put your well-being in check, then what happens is actually success is on the other side of that equation, not the other way around. So happiness doesn't come from working harder and harder and harder and making more money, and then you finally reach happiness. It's actually when you get your happiness in check first, then success begins to happen on the other side of that formula. And so, for example, the research has come back that your brain at positive versus negative, neutral, or stressed is 31% more productive.
Oh my goodness. Let's let that sink in for just a second. That if our brain is at happy, is what you said.
Yeah, if it's at positive versus negative,
positive,
neutral,
yeah, that's right,
or stressed,
31% more effective. And so, see, that takes me right back into classrooms of my childhood where, you know, we were going through drudgery. And I know not everything can be like sunshine and rainbows and unicorns every single day. I don't know, maybe it can be, but I know there's, you know, there's obviously work to be done, but whenever, I mean, that just sort of runs counterintuitive to the way that schools have gone for so long. It's like, put your head down, get to work, do your work. Kids are like dreading it. And then the bell rings and everybody goes sprinting out the door. And it turns out, it sounds like that all of that has been setting us up at a cognitive disadvantage. Does that pretty much summarize it?
Absolutely. And not only that, but teachers, they drag themselves out of school. You know, they're slumped over, they're exhausted. They carried the thinking load for our kids all day. They are overworked. And so they're depleted as well. And, you know, I agree. I think that what we're uncovering here, and this is actually happening in many businesses, a hospital recently reached out to me and said, hey, can you come train our upper level management team on happiness? Because we saw your blog about how we can increase productivity levels by 31% if we can put the well-being of our employees at the forefront. And so the number one keynote, back to school keynote that I get asked to do is the science of happiness, because I think certain schools are starting to say, hey, our teachers have been very unhappy and their well-being matters. And so I see teachers at school in the evenings. I see them there during the day on Saturday and Sunday. And they're working so hard to try to stay on top of everything. But what they don't realize, I think, is that it's never, or they do realize this, it's never enough. They're never caught up. And in all actuality, when their well-being is suffering so much, they're not at their highest productivity levels.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so, I mean, it seems so intuitive. It just makes sense. You know, I look back over the various phases of my life, and I think that, I mean, it just makes sense that whenever you're doing something that makes you happy, or if you've brought happiness into whatever it is that you're doing, that it would make sense that you would be more productive. But I wonder why it is that I know it's in schools, but also, you know, like what you were saying in Chrysler, it's like we've been going in the opposite direction, and we feel like work has to be work, and that work and happiness are like mutually exclusive of each other, you know. And you even think back to, you know, some of the big leaders in business, and you think of like Steve Jobs, where he was, you know, kind of like angry and was hard to deal with. And you think of like Jack Welch, who was like my way or the highway. And I mean, like, a lot of that, the happiness kind of gets snuffed out of that. And I think of, you know, school leaders that are kind of the same way to some extent, like, let's get back to work. Let's get back to it. And I wonder why in schools, why we've gone down that road, you know, just doesn't make sense to me.
No, it doesn't. I think it comes from anxiety that everyone is feeling. And, you know, it's happening across the board in workplaces. And I also kind of feel that working your tail off, so to speak, has become sort of like a badge of honor. And,
oh, yeah. Yeah.
You know, I'm pretty real, Matt. I can call an ace an ace. And in all honesty, there are times when I catch myself and I go, you know, I'm basing my self-worth on my ability to produce in a day's time, because I'm a producer, right? And so if I just really bust it and pull a 16-hour day, I feel at times a little bit better about myself, because I'm like, yeah, you know, I really worked hard and I'm a producer and this is who I am. But I've also learned that I have to incorporate play into my life, because what we know is that this term of play and laughter is super important in our classrooms and in the workplace. So just to give you an example, I was talking with my stepson this weekend, and he works in a very high profile attorney's office as a lawyer. And he was saying that there are men there in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who have kind of prided themselves on the fact that they've missed almost every Christmas. They work 15-hour work days. And, you know, as a young 30-year-old, he's kind of saying, I don't want to do that with my life. I'm willing to work hard, but my family is really important. So I really want to be home in the evenings. I want to be able to take a vacation with my family. And so I think that some of that younger generation is starting to kind of realize that, hey, it's not actually about how much you can produce in a day, and that, you know, carrying that badge of honor because you worked an 80-hour work week it's actually not a badge of honor. It means that you need to restructure your life.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And, you know, younger age groups versus older age groups, but also in the different work areas too. I mean, that's not just specifically for lawyers too, is it? It's like, you know, I mean, everybody seems to know, I've got a handful of them that pop to mind immediately, of the teachers where you always know where they're going to be. It's because they're always in their classroom, you know, and they're grading papers, and they're creating bulletin boards and they're rearranging their classroom or their lesson planning, and it's like they're always there. And it's a real thing. It can really happen for us to totally 100% dedicate our lives to our jobs and never leave. But then, what kind of life does that end up being,
Yes, you're exactly right. And I think back to a conversation I had a year ago with a teacher who kind of took me to the side, and she said, Kim, I work every Saturday in my classroom. And this past year, I decided I wasn't going to do that because I was missing my first graders' soccer games. And she said, this is the first year that my evaluation has come back as just effective versus highly effective. And so I'm going to have to go back to working those weekends. And I said, you know what, Jamie, you and I need to have a talk here because, and I referenced you talk about this in your book, the MED, the minimum effective dosage. And so you even reference how you can boil water at 276 degrees, but why do that when you get the same effect at 212 degrees, right?
Right, yeah.
And so what I find is that teachers in general are perfectionistic in nature, and they work really, really hard, and they want all of their ducks in a row. And it's an admirable trait. They want to do their very best, but I think that they have to make a decision that sometimes takes a little bit of courage that says, okay, I'm going to back off a little bit because my well-being and my personal life needs to be important. And so going back to this conversation with Jamie, I said, here's what I'm going to tell you, Jamie, and this is going to be really hard for you to hear, but I actually think you need to be okay with effective. Like, I know that we all want to hit it out of the ballpark and we all want to be highly effective. But if the difference between the two means that you miss your child's soccer games every Saturday because you're spending it in a school, then I actually think you need to have the courage to say, I'm going to be okay with effective. We have to be okay with effective when our personal lives are being overrun. And I talked to another teacher who's a grandmother, and she said, Kim, if there was one piece of advice I could give to the younger teachers, I would tell them, don't miss out. Don't stay in that classroom past 4 o'clock. You get home and you spend time with your family, because she said, I didn't do that. I worked till 5 or 6 or 7 most nights. And she said, now as I'm older and I look back, I would do anything to get that time back. And so I just kind of want to give teachers permission. I think they need to hear that while we want them to step in the classrooms and do their very best job, that in all actuality, if their well-being is higher, they're going to do a good job. And so maybe they need to take some steps to get control of their life again. And I really want to give them the permission to do that. They deserve it.
Yeah. Yeah. What you just said there about the effective versus highly effective, that really resonated with me, because I'm thinking, what about that teacher? What would it take? How much extra work would it take to go from effective to highly effective? Like, what's the cost there? And then you think about, what are the benefits to the students from the teacher going from effective to highly effective? Like, how much is that actually going to improve the student's achievement? How is it going to improve their well-being? Like, what are the results that would actually come out of that? And at some point, I've got to think that it's diminishing returns, that at some point you continue to put all of that extra time and all of that extra effort in, but then what does that actually get the students? And then what's the cost to your own life? I start to look at it that way, weighing out the pros and cons and everything. And at some point, to get that extra badge on your uniform that says I'm highly effective, at some point, it's not boosting, student outcomes all that much. It's definitely not boosting your personal life and your relationships with your family, but it's just kind of like getting that badge. And at some point, we got to figure out, what are we really getting out of this to get that badge of highly effective? You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And so I think that this is going to make us uncomfortable. Like, we have to be willing to be uncomfortable. We have to stretch ourselves and to grow. And so it's going to feel uncomfortable to leave things undone in our classroom. Yeah. It's going to feel uncomfortable to not have everything in our nice, neat stacks, because we've been operating like this for so long. And I think, I think that it's just really time that teachers take control of their lives again. And there's certain things that we can't control. We're never going to control the amount of expectation that's put on our teachers. You know, I know this field is extremely demanding, but what we can do is start to think about our reactions and the decisions we make based on those things. You know, when I look at the happiness research, Matt, everybody has a baseline that they're operating out of. And so your baseline might be here and my baseline might be here. And so what happens is something good happens in our lives. So for example, we buy that new car, or I go get a new pair of shoes, or you buy a new tech gadget. And
you know me so well.
I do. And so our happiness level will go up for a period of time, but then it will come right back and it resets itself to whatever your operating baseline is. And so when we look at a person's baseline, 50% is genetic. So 50% of your happiness baseline comes from your mom or your dad or a mixture of both, and there's nothing you can do to change it. And sometimes when I tell teachers this, I see them like drop their heads like, oh, I'm so doomed, right? But no, the 50% of it is genetic. And you and I know this. There are people who come into the world who are just able to kind of let everything roll off their shoulders, and they seem to dance around obstacles and challenges and just kind of move on from them. And then there's others of us who can get like super stressed by challenges and things that we're dealing with. And so if you think of it as a pie chart, 50% is genetic. And then the part that surprised me the most is that 10% of your happiness is based on your external circumstances.
Only 10%. Is that right?
It is. It comes back. It's so hard to believe, but I've really researched it. And so 10% of your happiness comes from what kind of car you drive, what kind of money you make, what kind of house you live in, what kind of vacations you take. And even, believe it or not, they have discovered that people can encounter really terrible, tragic things in their life. And the body has this amazing ability, or the brain does, to kind of come back up to whatever its baseline is after a certain amount of time. And so I think also what happens is that all of us allow challenges or things that we cannot control to take up like 90% of that pie chart at times, you know? Yeah. And the science tells us it's 10%. If it's more than that, you're allowing it to be. And so what I have found most intriguing is that that leaves 40% of the pie chart, and that each and every one of us have the ability to increase our happiness levels by 40%. And that's a practice I've put into my own life. In the last 10 years, I have what I call happiness habits. And this doesn't mean that I go around and I'm the happiest person all of the time. I mean, my husband would tell you that you'll find me crying on my office floor because this is part of my personality. I'm an extremist, and whatever's happening at the moment is happening, you know? But what it does mean is that I bounce back a lot quicker than I used to. And the lens through which I kind of view the world has changed because of this. Knowing the research and implementing some strong practices in my life that have really helped me really love my life in really big ways a lot of the time, regardless of what's going on.
Yeah. Wow. That blows my, I've heard you talk about this before, and it still blows me away that we have control over 40% of our, happiness, and that the external factors that happen to us are only 10% of it. And it just amazes me that so often we get stuck in that mindset of thinking that what happens to us affects our happiness. But really, like you said, and this was the big, mind-blowing thing for me that you just said, is that if it's more than that, if it's more than 10%, then you're letting it affect you more than you really need to, and more than it's really built to. And so I think you were starting to kind of go this way. So now that you've seen some of this research, and you've seen how, like you said, 40% of your happiness is dependent on yourself. So what are some of those things that we can do for ourselves to, just like you said, to help ourselves love the life that we have more?
Well, one of the things that I teach people in my happiness workshops is that they do need to start valuing themselves. I love this quote that if you can't see your own value, then the world will not be able to give you value back.
Wow. Say that again. Will you say that again?
I will. If a person can't see their own value, then the world will not give you value back. And so what I mean by that is even, I go back to this summer when I worked with a group of Kentucky teachers, and I asked them to do a walking pair share and to share something that they had done just for themselves in the last month. And of all the teachers there, I think it was 26 out of 28 of them could not come up with one thing they had done for themselves this past summer.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And so, I think we're also kind of taught and trained that we are to constantly deplete our own resources and give to everyone else and take care of everyone else before we take care of ourselves. And I look at my mom's generation, which is exactly what they did. I mean, even my mom, she was the last one to sit down at the meal that she had prepared. And not only that, but we had a bar with 4 regular high seats, and then we didn't have another seat. So she pulled her little chair, which sat lower by the dishwasher, and she ate, in the worst chair that we had. It's like this idea that we always put everyone else first. And what that does, I think, is that makes for some angry, resentful people because they never knew that they were allowed to put themselves first sometimes. And I really teach that to people. Like, my son comes first sometimes, and sometimes my husband comes first, but I also come first a lot of the time because if, we'll go back to this idea of keeping your cup full. I actually think you have to do more than keep your cup full. Like you need to keep your cup overflowing, and then you only give away the excess that's coming out of that cup so you don't deplete your own reserves. And so, this might mean that you create a time of your day, a little spot in one of your rooms. For me, it's this rocking chair that sits back here in my office. I call this my meditation room. And every night I come back here and I give myself 15 minutes, and my family knows no matter what's going on, I get 15 minutes, and you better not knock on that door, and you better not ask anything from me.
Unless the house is burning down, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I've had to train them. But I think like little ways too. For example, when somebody offers to buy you a cup of coffee, what do we say? Oh, that's okay. I can get my own. Or somebody offers to pay for a meal, or something as small as someone opens the door and you say, that's okay, I have it. What we're saying is we're telling the world, hey, I don't value myself enough to receive that gift. And that's what I mean by if you can't see your value, the world's not going to give you value back. So let's start seeing ourselves as valuable human beings and give ourselves whatever it is that you need in order to make sure that you're keeping your well-being at the forefront. And I'll give you one more example. I was talking to a young mother recently, and she said, Kim, I'm ashamed to admit this. I have a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I should be happy, but I'm completely lost. My day consists of getting them to the babysitter, doing the Walmart shopping, cooking the meal, cleaning the house, picking up toys. And I know this sounds terrible, but I don't even know who I am anymore, and I'm not happy. And I said, you know what, Madeline? You have to start putting yourself first. Like, don't you want to raise your daughters to know that mommy loves herself enough to also take care of herself first sometimes? Mm-hmm. And we have to start being okay with that. And so I always tell teachers, like, I don't know if it's a walk. I don't know if it's a book that you read. I don't know if it's a massage that you go get. I don't know if it's a cup of hot tea and 10 minutes you give yourself at night. But let's find a way to say, hey, my well-being and my happiness matters. And I'm going to be a better parent, a better teacher, a better friend if I can give to myself at times and know that means maybe other things get pushed on the list further down, so to speak.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true. I've heard somebody else talk about this before, and compare it to whenever you're on an airplane and they talk about the oxygen masks, and they always tell you that if the oxygen masks deploy, that you should always put yours on first before you help somebody else. And I heard somebody talk about this, and every time I hear this now, I always go back to it, and you think, well, that doesn't make any sense. You always think of, I need to put other people first. And it's such a big thing in our society to put other people first. And so often you hear teachers say, well, I've got to put my students first. And you hear parents say, I'm going to put my kids first. And that's fine to some extent. But then whenever, like you said, think of that cup, once that cup goes down and you're totally depleted, then you can't do anything to help those kids. You can't do anything to help those students. You can't do anything to help anybody. It's like all of a sudden you're in this, in this cabin of this plane that's in distress, and the oxygen levels are going down, and you're getting everybody's oxygen masks on. And then all of a sudden you're the one that passes out because you've lost your oxygen, and you're not able to help other people. If you want to be, and that's not a bad thing, is it? To be service driven, to be service oriented, and to want to help other people. But once you get deteriorated down to a certain point, then you're of no use to anybody else. And I think this is such an important message, especially in the education realm, because so many of us educators get split off in so many different directions that we become completely depleted, and we're just not able to help anybody else, and we're not able to help ourselves, and we lose that value. And I think that's such an important thing. So I'm so glad that that you give people permission. Isn't it silly to think of that, to think that someone needs to get permission, and that, they might be listening to this video and they're like, oh, I've finally been given permission. You could give yourself permission, but sometimes you have to hear it from somebody else to know that, this really is okay. It kind of like validates you to go ahead and do that.
Brene Brown is one of the authors that I follow, and she wrote these great books, The Gifts of Imperfection and Daring Greatly. And she actually talks about permission slips. And she says that she'll actually take a sticky note and she will write herself, like, I give myself permission to screw up this week as a parent. I give myself permission to not be as organized as I usually am. Like, she will actually write permission slips, because we have been kind of trained to kind of go through life and be flawless. And in fact, I've really kind of hit, I've overcome this greatly in the last year, but I actually think my flaws and the things that make me imperfect are actually also what really free me up. My friends and I joke, we have this text message, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not giving you the mom trophy this week. You're not getting it because you didn't attend your kid's meeting. And we kind of laugh because, we got to add some humor to this. Like, we can't all always serve on every board and volunteer. And, the other thing I tell people is, like, and you're talking about wearing a badge of honor. We wear this badge of honor like, well, I've never missed one of my kids' sporting events, or I would, my job is to raise my kids and not, and it's like, oh my gosh, like, hey, let's nurture your marriage. Like, let's you and your spouse go away once a quarter, because, like, you're showing your kids that your marriage matters. Like, this idea of being everything to everyone, we can all feel the pressure of that. Sometimes on Facebook, I'm like, oh, geez, that mother's hitting it all out of the ballpark.
Oh, Facebook is the worst for this thing, isn't it?
Oh, it's like, oh my God, like, I didn't do that craft. We didn't do pumpkin carving. I didn't bake the birthday cake.
Yeah, you put Pinterest and Facebook together, and all of a sudden it's like our self-worth just goes in the tank.
Yeah. So, like, being a parent is so important to me in so many ways. And I actually hope that, my kids someday say, my mom really was happy and really embraced life, and she took care of herself. That's what she taught me. Like, I think that's what I want to do. And so I want to encourage teachers to actually maybe scale back just a little bit and incorporate play. You know, play is such an important part of our life. I teach Genius Hour because it's based on Google's philosophy, and Google says, hey, we think it's important that you play, that your brain is going to be set towards positive if we give you opportunities to play and to relax, you know, during the workday. And so they have found that you know, they give their employees or encourage them to spend 20% of their work week kind of playing on a project that they're creatively interested in. And what they have found is that 20% of their best ideas have come from that, I'm sorry, 50% of their best ideas have come from that 20% of playtime. And so this is the other thing that we've done in schools. We've said, hey, we're going to take out the kindergarten kitchens because we don't have time for kids to cook. You know, I better not walk around and see you ever doing a craft with your kid or a coloring sheet. And we're going to cut the recesses down because we need
that's the worst. Yeah, that one drives me crazy.
And it's happened, right?
Yeah. And it's like,
what we now know is that what happens with play is that it opens the mind. It opens up the imagination. And so we have to give our kids opportunities to play during the day. I love what Jed Derryberry said on Facebook this morning. He did a post since it's Halloween, and he said something like, pass out candy to your kids and have a party and play games and forget the standards for the day, because he always says, you know, love first and teach second. And so have the freedom to embrace the Halloween holiday and let kids act wild and crazy for the day.
I saw that post, and he also says, if you try to fight it, it's going to make it worse.
Yeah, that of which we resist persist, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so I think that we need to start reimagining what our personal lives can look like and what our classroom lives can look like.
Yeah. Now, I want you to kind of follow up on that a little bit. We've talked some about the science of happiness. You know, what does the research say? We've talked some about what we can do for ourselves as teachers, and we've kind of started to touch on how this can affect our classrooms. Because I know if you can pull in some of that science and that research and everything, and if we understand how our brain works, how our bodies work, how this whole, you know, feeling an idea of happiness really works, I know there's some really practical applications in the classroom of how we can make our classrooms happier places. Because like you said, if you move from even neutral to positive, it has these huge gains. This to me sounds like a way to operate our class smarter instead of working harder. And so I was hoping that's something that you might be able to touch on, is how might this look, not just for ourselves as teachers, but how might this look in our classrooms with our students too?
Yes. So I have a couple of ideas, and it's funny because you know, I interview and have for years. I interview kids, and I always ask this question, like, who's your favorite teacher over the years, and then more importantly, why? And out of the hundreds of kids that I've asked this question to, I get the very same version of the exact two answers every single time.
Wow, this is great. I can't wait to hear what this is.
And so one, they say, is my teacher is happy. Like, and I go, well, what do you mean by that? I can just like he wants to be there. Like, he loves his job. He loves coming in the classroom. He gets so excited to engage with us. And so I always get a version of, because kids pick up on this, right? They pick up on our energy. They pick up on our stress. And so my teacher is happy. And then the other resounding answer that I get is, my teacher cares about me. And so I get the same version of those two things. And it's funny, I was working with a 5th grade classroom. We were implementing a growth mindset curriculum last year. And so what I wanted them to do was to identify problems either in their community or in their school, and then work to find solutions to those problems. And you know what those 5th grade kids came up with? Our school is a stressful place, and our teachers are super stressed.
Wow. And the kids know, you know, they're the best at sniffing that stuff out.
They are. And so they created all these campaigns to try to lift the spirits up of the teachers in their school.
Wow.
Yeah. And so So I think they feel the pressure that we feel as well. And so going back to this idea, okay, so how do we do this in our classroom? Number one, I think you should be playing in your classroom daily. You should have brain breaks. There's this book that someone gave me. It's by Dr. Spencer Kagan, and it's called Silly Sports and Goofy Games.
Nice.
Yeah. And so, I think making sure that I think it's worth, 10 or 15 minutes a day to play with your kids. I mean, Stuart Brown, and I'm looking for his book on my bookshelf, but he wrote this entire book about the importance of play in the classroom. And what he says is, yeah, here it is. It says play, how it shapes the brain, opens the imagination, and invigorates the soul. And so we've got to incorporate this back into our classrooms. Our kids need time to create. They need time to play. As adults, Matt, you and I need time to play. That's not something that goes away after childhood. Like, we also need time to play. And so with my kids, I think doing brain breaks and having playtime is important. The other thing that I always did is, gratitude is it's one of my 5 happiness habits, the power of gratitude. When we can scan our environment and pick out things that we're really grateful for, then what that does is it rewires our brain. The human brain has somewhere between 50 and 70,000 thoughts a day. And on average, 80% of those thoughts are negative. And not only that, Matt, but 95% of those negative thoughts are on repeat every single day. And so, if I ask you to go back from the time the alarm went off this morning, what was your first thought? Then when you got dressed, were your pants too tight? Did you not like the way you looked in the mirror? I mean, it's crazy, but we all kind of start this. And so gratitude is such a powerful tool in our life. And when we take time I have a gratitude journal. And so every night I sit down and I have 10 things. You could start with 3 things, but I have 10 things. And I say, I am thankful for hearing my husband and son giggle tonight during supper. I am thankful for the green grass. I am thankful to see the fall leaves turning. I am thankful that I have this cozy office to work in. I am thankful that the sun is shining today. And what happens is when we start to do that, my brain now all day long scans. It scans for things that I go, thank you for that. And I'm appreciative of this, so that I can retrain some of those 70,000 thoughts to be more positive. And so, I started this at school with a group of teachers. We called it the Grateful 5, and I reached out to about 7 of my teacher friends, and we were all feeling the stress of school. And we decided to create what we called the Grateful 5. And so throughout the day, we would email each other 5 quick things that we were thankful for. And what that did was that meant that maybe, at 10:01, one teacher sent theirs, and I quickly read through their list, and that, kind of reset my brain towards positive. And then maybe 3 hours later, or at the end of the day, a few more people kind of quickly shot through their list. And so we had these constant reminders throughout the day to focus on what we're thankful for. Did the same thing in the classroom with my kids. We took 15 minutes after lunch every day, and we did meditation. And then we did something that you're grateful for, or something that you appreciate, something you want to compliment someone in the class, or a struggle that you're having. And you know what? I got those kids down where we could go around and we could get all 27 of them to state one thing they're grateful for in about 90 seconds. It took 90 seconds. And what that does is just retrain our brains to start seeing the good in our life. And so, a couple of those tips might be helpful to teachers.
Yeah. That kind of makes me think, because I can hear some people saying, with all of the stuff that I have to cover in class, I don't know that I have time to do that. And you know what that makes me think of? That makes me go back to, I think I remember seeing this in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he talks about sharpening the saw. Was that Stephen Covey that said that, I think?
I think it was. Yeah, I've heard that term too. I think they talk about that they have this program called Highly Effective Schools, and they teach kids the sharpening the saw.
Yeah, and it makes me think of no, you know what? I think I always get this mixed up because this might have been Lincoln actually that said I'm going to look this up afterwards and it'll probably all be totally wrong, but the idea is he says if I have an hour to cut down or if I have a whole day to cut down a tree, I'm going to spend the first 2 hours sharpening the saw. Because if you go and you start trying to cut that tree with a dull blade, you might cut it for, hours. Whereas if you have a sharp saw, you're going to be able to cut it in a lot less time. And so then what do you end up with? It's such a perfect parallel to our lives, because sometimes you cut with that dull saw and you feel like, man, I'm doing a lot of work. I am working hard. I am cutting this tree down. My muscles are getting sore. I am exhausted. I am sweating like crazy. I am doing so much work. And it ends up taking you 2 or 3 times longer because you're cutting with a dull saw. And so it's like, what if we take the time to do the things that set us up to do our best work? And productivity shouldn't even be always the end goal. It should be, creating a better version of ourselves so that we can create a better version of the world,
Yeah.
And, another thing that you were talking about was you said something about how 80% of our thoughts are negative and how 95% of those negative thoughts are on repeat. And I just read an article in the Wall Street Journal. I was actually looking over here to look it up while you were talking a second ago. And it says, 1 habit to make you happier today: repeating a positive phrase or mantra to yourself creates new pathways between neurons in your brain, conditioning you to feel calmer and healthier. And it says, do you have a personal mantra? You should. Research shows that thinking of a word or a phrase that affirms our values and repeating it over and over produces powerful physiological changes, lowering our cortisol, enhancing endurance, and reducing perception of effort during physical exertion. So it's like, just by doing that, and I've gotten this phrase from you, positive self-talk, reminding yourself that, you don't want to, it's not all that like silly stuff that you hear on TV about, gosh darn it, people like me, but it's reminding yourself of the great things about you and about the positive things that you're doing. And it's not, like happy, touchy-feely stuff. This is real research proven stuff that improves you, that makes you a happier person and makes you more effective.
Yes, I absolutely love what you just said. And that's a great segue. So here's what I know. Carol Dweck talks about this when we teach growth mindset. And she says, the beliefs that you hold about yourself profoundly affect the way you lead your life. And so what we know is that words have incredible power. They have incredible energy in our life. And so, I'm looking at this here that hangs, like I have my affirmation quote that I wrote out a few months ago. And there's one that hangs in my bathroom mirror. So I read it every morning when I get up. And then there's this one in my office because it's my North Star. It's where I come to kind of renegotiate the direction I'm headed in and how I want to serve for this day. And so mine says, I expand in abundance, success, love, and happiness every day as I inspire those around me to do the same. All right. And so this hangs on my bathroom wall and it hangs in my office because here's what the research also says. So if we're talking about the power of our beliefs. So what I know is that the thoughts I'm having in my head, those turn into words, right? So whatever I'm thinking become the words that I speak. And then the words that I speak become the beliefs that I feel about myself. And those beliefs become the actions that I take every day. And the actions I take every day become my habits for life. And my habits become what the world is constantly mirroring back to me. So let me break this down for you. One of the beliefs that I've held about myself is that I do not have the ability to eat healthy. I'm a runner. I run 30 miles a week. I'm super, high strung. I've got to get that energy out. You and I know this. We took a run together one time.
Yes.
You know what this is.
Just barely kept up with you.
Yeah. And so I run 30 miles a week, but I have these like really poor eating habits. And so every night before I go to bed, I go to the cabinet and I get 4 Hostess cupcakes out and I pour myself a glass of milk. And that's my routine. And so,
Kim.
Yes, you did not know this about me.
No, I didn't. I'm kind of shocked by that. It's okay. I still love you, but I'm kind of shocked by that.
You also need to know that I've been on a 14-day no sugar kick, so I've been kind of grouchy lately, but I'm making progress. So what this means is that I have this belief that I've carried around that like all of my friends have figured out this healthy eating thing. They're all losing weight. They're in their 40s. They've got control of it. They even have this crazy app where they count their calories. But my thoughts, my fixed mindset has been, this is just something you don't have, Strobel. You, for whatever reason, do not have the willpower to get healthy eating habits. You've tried for years. You fail within the first day. And so my thoughts become the words that I speak, right? Oh gosh, I'm not a healthy eater. I eat junk all day long. It's terrible. All right. Those become the words that I say. And the words that I say become the inner belief that I have about myself, which is I just do not have this capability. And those beliefs turn into my actions. And my actions are every night at 10 o'clock, I go open the doors and I pull out my Hostess cupcakes, which those actions become my habits and that becomes my reality. And my reality is this: you do not have the ability to eat healthy and you never do eat healthy. And so the beliefs that we hold about ourselves, the words, the affirmations that we say, these things carry tremendous energy in our life. And what we know is that if we can start to rephrase it, for example, people assume I'm this health nut because they see me running all these miles. And I'll go to a restaurant and someone will be eating a dessert and they'll say something like, oh gosh, oh, you would never eat anything like this, Kim. You would never. And I go, you know what I do? I jump right into saying, because I feel kind of bad because I run all these miles and I don't have this super skinny body. And so I have to make up for it. And I go, oh no, I eat 4 Hostess cupcakes every night before I go to bed. And you know what I've done? I've changed what I say because my words matter. I've adopted Carol Dweck's philosophy, which is, you know what? I'm not going to lie to him. I'm not a healthy eater yet, but I'm working on it. My new goal is to have 1 piece of fruit a week.
That's a good start.
What do you think of that? Right?
Yeah.
And so, yes, when we're talking about the power of our thoughts and we're talking about those 70,000 negative thoughts, you've got to actually take action and do some things to catch yourself having those thoughts. So if that means writing an affirmation or having a word or having kind of what I call that North Star, that thing that brings you back on track, I think that's super important. And that's a super idea for teachers to have a statement, a word, a quote, whatever it is that makes them stay in check with, okay, what's my purpose today? How do I want to serve?
Yeah. You know, I heard somebody take this idea and apply it in the classroom beautifully recently. So it was at my conference that I just did in September that you were at. You were one of the presenters, and another one of the presenters was Joy Kerr, who teaches middle school language arts in the Chicago area. And she talked about the power our words have on our students. And she said, sometimes if we're not careful, the words that we call our students can have a huge impact on them. And so she says, even if you're joking around, and it's not to say that you can't joke around, but just to be mindful of the words that you use when you joke around with kids, joking that they're slackers or goofballs or, whatever. She started to shift that you know, even if she jokes around, that's okay. But she's also thought about what are the positive words that I'm calling my kids. So she says, we in my class, we are researchers and we are creative thinkers. And she came up with all of these words that she used to describe these kids. And she actually uses them in the classroom and calls them that. It's like you're calling it into action, like you're calling it into being, like your words become reality, because they do, don't they?
Yes, they absolutely do. And I also heard a similar idea where a class wrote a pledge, and they would start their day by reciting it. I am strong. I am courageous. I am a creative thinker. When I fail, I get back up. I work hard. I understand struggle. You know, and they kind of wrote this manifesto of all of these things that encompass who they are. And this particular teacher, they call it reciting their pledge or their manifesto. And so the first 30 seconds or so is the entire class reading those words, because we know that those words have an effect on our belief system. And again, the beliefs that we hold about ourselves, they affect how we navigate life. And so I think that's a great idea. Yeah. And what you're talking about is negative labels. You know, people sometimes think they're funny, but you know, when you're told, oh, we giggle at you because you're always late, or you're disorganized, or you're lazy, or you know, I was always told that I was careless because I do everything like really fast. I'm not someone who always pays attention to details. I'm action oriented, and like I've carried that label with me for years. I remember like my teachers would write like, Kim is very careless, you know, her handwriting is so sloppy. And I think that you carry labels with you for years. Oh, yeah. And they turn into the beliefs that you have about yourself. So we have to kind of be careful about that.
Yeah. How many times do we hear of, you know, adults that remember the labels that were put on them as, I mean, you just did it, you know, and all of us do it. And we have nicknames, or we are called certain things, or, you know, all of those things become reality if we're not careful. And even sometimes when we are careful, they become reality too. So.
Words turn into beliefs.
Yes.
That's the bottom line. Words turn into beliefs. And so
yeah.
In my growth mindset workshop, I actually have teachers think back to a label that they've carried with them. And it's really astounding what they come up with, because they start to make the connection that this word that was associated with me in school is actually a word that carries a negative connotation in my life now. And one teacher shared, she said, like, she is always just a few minutes late to everything. Okay. And she's been told her whole life, like her peers kind of giggle and they kind of laugh at it. And they don't mean to like make fun of her. They're just trying to make light of it. But it was funny because that morning she came into the conference 5 minutes late. And you know what she said was, she said, I know people don't mean to hurt me, but it feels really shameful. Like I feel ashamed. And it's become a self-fulfilling prophecy for her, because she's been told that so much that that's her belief system, is that she can't show up anywhere on time. Wow.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. There's been so much. Oh man, I got to say, first of all, that I needed to have this conversation. I needed to, I know we're recording this so people can watch it, but I think I needed it as much as anybody else. And oh man, all of the actionable stuff that we've gotten out of this, and the summary of all of the research and everything. This is everything that I hope that this interview would be. So Kim, thank you so much for this. If folks want to get in touch with you, or if they want more Kim Strobel, where can they go?
So they can go to my website, which is strobeleducation.com.
Can you spell Strobel for them real quick?
Yeah, STROB as in boy, EL. So www.strobeleducation.com. And you can sign up for our newsletter. And what I do, Matt, is every other week, I send out, it might be a blog post or a growth mindset lesson that I've done, or an upcoming workshop that I'm teaching. That comes out every other week, but you're also going to see a little spot on there, a little box that you can tick that says Joy Drop. And so what I send on the off week is what I call a Joy Drop. And that's if you're interested in happiness tips, if you're interested in little inspirational stories. What I wanted was a place for teachers to sit down on a Thursday around noon at their computer and just have a little 30-second happiness tip or blurb that would just kind of reset them towards positive for the afternoon. So if you're also interested in getting the happiness tips, you would also want to click on the Joy Drop box.
That's great. Wow. That's an awesome resource. So wonderful. I'm sure folks will want to go out and get signed up for that. And so I just want to thank you one more time. Thanks so much for coming on and for being a guest, and excited to see where everybody goes with all of this great new information. So thank you again, Kim.
You are most welcome.